I know you've seen this advertised in other shows for $99.95, but for tonight only. Still regarding the two possible human approaches to growth, to expansion, to even that might resemble in the secondary world satisfaction of some kind, to wit, a kind of method, a kind of approach that would be directed toward things stable, knowledge, as opposed to that which would be along the lines of an ongoing, open-ended process, thinking. Very specifically, old, ordinary, three-dimensional, polarized intelligence is helplessly thing-oriented. In this case, the examples we were going to talk about, the things, of course, when I say thing-oriented, is knowledge in this case. Once you realize, what to some of you may seem already evident, that ordinary intelligence in everyone is hungry for, is wired up for, is primed for, feeds off of, or to put it in the literary way in which we just did, is thing-oriented, then you see that the process, of which I'm not denying the ordinary intelligence, ordinary people are involved with what they call thinking. I'm just trying to up the stakes by comparing it to the thing, the noun knowledge. But as we were mentioning last time, ordinary intelligence would have it if it was asked this way, that thinking is simply a means to an end, and the end being knowledge. But what that does results, again, in many areas that ordinary people throughout history find to be not conclusive in a satisfying sense here, but simply continuing strings of conundrums, puzzlements, such as, one of the great examples again, get very specifically into things. How about people who say, we'll bring it up to date, if I had a new car, I would be happy. Now the words would tell you that the ultimate goal, and we're not playing rhetorical games, but the words and the intent behind it, for any ordinary sane person, the ultimate goal would have to be happiness. Because here's the sentence, and I could use all sorts of things. It did not have to be an automobile. It could be all sorts of things. It could be secret knowledge. It could be if I had more talent. But it is always a thing in the thought that if I had a car, I would be happy. So in this case, as always, the goal is not the thing. In this case, the goal is happiness. And yet, ordinary intelligence is not wired up in anyone, at the old neural building site, is not wired up in anyone to deal with that kind of open-ended, fluid process. It's too unstable, that is, the idea of happiness, and people even sit around and philosophically, or after a few beers, debate, well, who can say what is happiness? It's all subjective, and sometimes what makes me happy and other times doesn't make me happy. We're getting close to the conundrums, which is near the horse latitudes. And so the ordinary intellect, even though it does not go through this kind of analytic process, it is, without any doubt, you surely hear this is not simply some kind of strange opinion I've come up with, the object is happiness, because everyone knows that the ultimate object, the goal, is not a car, because you can get a car. I mean, you could try hard enough and kite checks or do something and even get a car you couldn't afford. If you picked out a Corvette, a Ferrari, some way it's possible to get it. That is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal in this case, if I had a new car, I would be happy. The goal is happiness. But notice, the intellect cannot deal happiness as a process as opposed to the car, as opposed to anything. And so the ordinary intellect, not because it's flawed, not because it is stupid, not because it's immoral, not because of anything other than the physics of the three-dimensional world, cannot deal with that kind of fluid, ongoing process of happiness. And so even though if you stop somebody and say, wait a minute, you mean that your goal in life is to have a new car? An ordinary person is going to say, well, no, I'd like to have a new Corvette, but I just think it would help fulfill my lifestyle. I think it would make me more of a satisfied person. Well, I think I'd be happier. I mean, what's wrong with that? Well, nothing. It cannot deal, the ordinary intellect, with the ongoing process of happiness, or with any process. Remember, we're just at one example. And so it latches onto, it fixes itself on the thing. Even though, I didn't mean to lose you, even though that if you stopped and asked somebody, can you analyze this? Is it really a car you want? Nah, it's ultimately what I want to be happier. And I just think a car would make me happier. You know, what's it to you? Nothing. The object is, the goal is not the car, the goal is happiness. Is it any wonder, I mentioned conundrums, is it any wonder, if you need another way to look at it, of the bad rep that things get in life? Because, as we all know, you did go to all the trouble, go in debt, have to sell your hair to old Henry's grandchildren at Christmas. Some way you come up and you get a new car, you get a new Corvette, you're in debt to such a point that you're eating day-old bread that other people threw out that buys day-old bread. And sure enough, the first day or so, you're just happy. If I jumped out and said, are you happy? You'd go, hey, poster boy for happiness. And as we all know, that so-called happiness is not going to last. And so this has been debated, books on philosophy, churches, synagogues, people's brains, conversations all throughout history are now filled with the debate, the inquiry, the pondering as to what in the hell's wrong with life? Why can't we find happiness? But that's not how it starts. Because then if I jumped out and was dumb enough to play with it, I'd say, wait a minute, aren't you the guy that said the new Corvette would make you happy? Well, yeah, but something's wrong. Where do they look? Ordinary intelligence. Does it look at its intelligence? No. It'll look at the car. And if that's too specific, let's say that the car didn't give them a whole lot of grief. Of course, chances are with the car, it did give them some grief, so they can say, well, I thought I'd be happy. I went in debt up to here, bought the car, and then it was just one thing after another. I couldn't even afford to keep it up. I mean, it was fun for a few days, but the thing was a piece of junk. All right, if that wasn't the case, then it gets more widespread of what seems to be their dissatisfaction that, well, I thought a car would make me happy, but then I had a car and my clothes looked shabby. So then I need a new wardrobe. And then the kind of women I was picking up with the car, once I drove them back and they found out I was living in a housing project, I need a condo. In other words, ordinary intellect, what I want you to see, even though it's just one of these beautiful arrangements, efficiency on the hoof again. Life is arranged in such a way that ordinary intelligence cannot think, process. It is helplessly thing-oriented because of the nature of the electrical flow of energy that we call thought at the ordinary level, the episodic nature of what some people are pleased to call their consciousness, and the desire, the helpless built-in desire for thoughts to come to some sort of conclusion or something resembling a conclusion. Based on that, the ordinary intellect cannot deal with processes, open-ended, ongoing processes like happiness, and so it has to think within the kinds of discrete units that if I had a new car, I'd be happy. If I could be a better person. If I were taller. If I were 20 pounds lighter. But it's always a thing, and yet the beautiful efficiency is the things will not offer what the goal was. And so then you have the bad rap against material objects. And it normally comes out all the way from a breakdown in technology, I wish I didn't have this car, which is still pretty weak, into a more widespread area such as, well, perhaps the psychological forces driving me to want a new car, perhaps they are unconsciously self-defeating. I know I thought I wanted a new car, but something's wrong here. All the way from that to just the good old time moralistic view that, well, the gods, I should have known better. I should have known better. It says right here in the Old Testament, or it says right here in Buddha's 14th basket, he said, watch it, going in debt for a car, that kind of stuff. Or thou shalt not, whatever the hell it is, thou shalt not be involved in worship, things made out of sheet metal. And in other words, that old time, good old spiritual, religious view that this world is not our home. That is, when you can't make the payments on the car and you go out there and you look at it and go, pooey on you. It is, but see, that's the way it comes out. Because what else can the ordinary intellect do? Life has it arranged to where it appears to be that material objects can never deliver what they promise. Or if you want another way, they can never deliver what men imagine they'll deliver. Now, I use cars because that's a good, hard material, an example, probably as we could wish for, but it's not just cars. There are other nouns, there are other things. Religion, science, relationships. But take religion and science. I'll do them both. But you're still dealing with what would, if you ask somebody, why are you religious? Instead that they want a new car, they might say, I am trying, now that my hormones are running down, I'm near 50, a man might say, I've decided it's time for me to go back to the roots of my religion, that I should begin to worry about my eternal soul, since I've been spitting up blood and lost my car, at any rate. And if you ask somebody, it doesn't have to be that bad. It could be somebody that just says that they are treading a spiritual religious path, and if you said, well, why is that? They'd say, well, if I could ever once become if I can really live the life of a good Catholic, if I can become a real, in the spiritual sense, a Jew, or if I could be a true Muslim, a true slave of Allah, that would be happiness. And I tried cars and clothes and all that. And so now it seems like, to them, if they did go through cars and whatnot, that this is an improvement. That now I will be happy if I can become blank, a real Catholic, a real Baptist, whatever. They can do everything as much as humanly possible to fulfill the rituals, the demands of whatever the religion is. And I know that people are inclined to still talk a different way than they would defending their religion or explaining their religion than they would their new car, but surely you people can hear it. If you went to the person and says, you seem to be much closer to living the life of a real Catholic, of being a real Catholic. Yes, I know I've devoted more and more of my time, and I work for the parish, and I contribute the money. And if you said, are you that much happier? Did you reach the goal of being happier? Then if they would speak in somewhat the same way, you can hear this. The answer is no. Because they took, if you said, well, now, are you really a Catholic? In as much as, in the same way, do you really own a Corvette? No, they're making payments on it. And they say, yeah, it's in my name. So you can say, are you a real Catholic now? They could say, well, I'm not perfect. And you say, yeah. But they'd say, I'm making payments on it. In other words, I'm almost a Catholic. But are they any happier? Is now being a Catholic, did it make them happy in the same way that if I had a new car, I'd be happy? And the answer is no. There's nothing wrong with the Catholic Church. Nothing wrong with General Motors. That's only for you people that are so lucky as don't know. It's because the ordinary intellect is thing-oriented. And the object is not to be a good Catholic. The object is not to, well, I'm finally going to settle down and I'm going to be a Jew and get it over with. That's not it. What they're saying is I want to be happy, except the ordinary intellect cannot deal with that ongoing process, because now we're talking about the reality, the energy behind being a good anything in a religious sense, Muslim, Buddhist, whatever. They're talking about a process, not a thing. There's no such thing as a Catholic. There's no such thing as a Jew or Muslim or anything in a religious sense. Any more than a car is happiness. You can say a car is a car. There's a Corvette. I know it's a Corvette. All right, it is. But is that happiness? Well, now you're talking about two different things. Except ordinary intellect. If it is fixed on that, and when God says, well, if I had that, I'd be happy. And we'll still assume he's sane enough. And if I say, well, is that synonymous with happiness? He would say, well, unless you're being metaphorical, no. Happiness is one thing, a car is something else. But notice, they will still say, if I had the car, I'd be happy. Now, they might want to argue and say, well, you're obviously being metaphorical. But then if you said, well, now why is it you're trying to be a Catholic? Why is it so important now? Is a Catholic, if we look at a Catholic, look at an icon, look at these things of Jesus on the cross, or some, if you said, if there's such a thing as a Catholic, or you point to the Pope, in the same way you're pointing to a Corvette, and you said, now, is that the same? No, I wouldn't, I'm not being funny. You got to identify a Catholic as being a thing. That's because that's what the intellect says. If I was a real blank Catholic, Muslim, I would be happy. And if you say, all right, is that happiness? They say, well, no. And they can't hear it because the intellect is actually saying, and it understands at a level that I'll try to describe in a minute. It's not unconscious and it's not in some way distorted. But the intellect has a non-functional, that is just a piece of a greater complex schematic information that the car, being a Catholic, is not happiness. And me even thinking it is incorrect. But it doesn't know where else to go. And so if you said, all right, if that's a Catholic, you point to the Pope or anybody, is that happiness? In the same way that if you put it to somebody, all right, there's a Corvette, yeah. Is that the same thing as happiness? Well, no. All right, here is being a good blank, a Catholic. Is that happiness? No. They know it's not, but they don't know where else to go with it, because being a good Catholic, being religious, is a process. And I don't mean to make anything more evident than it is of owning an automobile. But it's a process, it's not a thing. But would that sell in the city? It wouldn't sell in the city any more than it would trying to sell General Motors or Chrysler on the basis of, hey, don't say your cars as things, sell them as processes. Of course, you're going to get sticky in the world of advertising. They would almost want to say, well, that is true, because you picked a good thing, because cars, we don't actually sell cars. We sell like a self-image. We sell a lifestyle. That's why we advertise and we show a sexy woman with blonde hair and just the top of the car, just a convertible. We don't have to show the rest, because the guys, they want the car to get the woman. And so they might say, we're already digging on that. But no, they're not. Because then I'd say, well, who's going to pay you to sell a process? And J. Walter Thompson, if he were still here, would say, what the hell are you talking about? Now, so you just said you're selling a process, not a car, that you're selling imagination. You're selling someone trying to improve their self-image or to change it. Yeah. Well, who is going to pay you to do that? I don't understand. Well, is there somebody around that's going to pay you to get people to change the way they think about themselves, the process of how they think about themselves? It doesn't make sense. In other words, you're saying that you're using that, a process, to sell a car, yeah. You don't hear any better than J. Walter Thompson, do you? In other words, it makes no sense to say, well, there's got to be an object or nobody'd pay us to do it. And then if I was this dumb, I'd go, uh-huh. And they'd go, uh-huh, what? And they think they missed it, which of course they did. And of course they weren't alone. The ordinary intellect, even, let me try it this way, even if it were approached in the way that I just attempted to do, because part of this is already extant in the city, in ordinary secondary thinking, that they would say that advertising often is not aimed at the product, that they're selling deodorant, they're selling mouthwash, and they don't say this mouthwash tastes real good anymore, this mouthwash kills germs anymore. They might, but what they really show is they show a couple smiling Or they show a girl looking at a guy and batting her eyes, and it says something like, boy, I'm glad I used blah, blah mouthwash. And they'd say, see, we're not actually selling the mouthwash. We're trying to sell kind of sex. We're trying to sell romanticism. They can say that, but what are they trying to sell? Mouthwash. You didn't hear it? Or they can say, we're not just selling cars through this advertising. We had some of the best brains in the business working on this new campaign. In fact, some of you may have noticed it was Honda went through that great, in the beginning they claimed it was a great campaign for that car, and they never showed the automobile. They just showed pictures of travel, seashores, and forests. And so they could really say, we're selling an idea. Really? They can say that, but they're selling a car. I'm not picking on advertising. It is simply that the ordinary intellect cannot deal with anything as fluid, as ongoing as processes. It can say it does. And of course it shuts down if you say, well, wait a minute, you said that you're selling an idea, but who paid you for this campaign? Well, Honda Company. What are they selling? Ideas? Well, no, they're selling cars. The ordinary intellect cannot see, it cannot begin to deal with anything other than what I'm calling processes and what they could agree with, like advertising, or like the going through the rituals, trying to live up to the standards of the Catholic Church. They could say, well, that's not actually a thing, it's not a noun, that's a kind of activity, it's kind of a verb. But they can't stop there, because ordinary intellect is helplessly wired up to think that any kind of process, all verbs lead to what? The object of the sentence. If it wasn't, a sentence, a good classic sentence, which is a good classic thought, is you have the subject, and the verb, and then the object, let's say. John got in his car. John bought the car. You can't say John bought. Then can't think about it. You say, well, what? Fred, Mary, did. There is no thought. It's just insane unless there's an object. That is, unless it becomes thing specific. The ordinary intellect cannot begin to deal with the fact that thinking is, for someone attempting to do this kind of stuff, that thinking is not a means to something. Thinking's it, as opposed to knowledge. But to the ordinary mentation, thinking is a verb. Thinking is all kinds of investigation, curiosity, contemplation, meditation, and it leads to something. If it does not, then your thinking was moot. It was a waste of time. You're on the wrong track. To a real revolutionist, and we're talking now not about ordinary thinking, of course, but to be able to think in a new place, there's no such thing as a waste of time. Because a waste of time has to be, well, there was a goal to this. There was an object to it. And if thinking is the end unto itself, a kind of plain thinking, a kind of revolutionary thinking, then how can it be a waste of time? And see, that makes no sense. The sentence, just what I said, makes rhetorical sense, I guess, linguistic sense in English, but it does not to the ordinary intellect, which can hear that sentence and go, why would you think if there's no point to it? If it's not going to become thing specific, why would anybody be religious? Why? And I say this as a good Catholic, says the man. Why would I go through all this and burn all those candles and wear out the knees of my pants and make all that? Why would I do all that if being a Catholic is a process? If you're saying religion is a process, why would I do that unless by God there's some object to it? Of course, I'd have to give them the full load of my intelligence and go, because that's all you could tell ordinary intelligence. You got me there. Why would I go through all this if there's no object to it? Why would I go buy a $50,000 Corvette if it wasn't going to make me $50,000 happy, if it weren't going to make me 5 times as happy as a $10,000 10-year-old Buick, why would I do it? Don't ask me. You don't need to holler at me. I'm a dentist. Well, don't take shots at me. I mentioned in passing that the ordinary intellect and its knowledge of life via things specific, which is all the ordinary intellect has. Now, it knows their verbs, it knows their processes, but verbs, rather than being in some specific sense of being transient verbs and non-transient, as far as ordinary intellect is concerned, all verbs are transient. That is, they got to lead somewhere. As I said, you can't say, well, Gustav thought for those of you that laughed and didn't know why about the Chi root that says the recent polls show you can't stop there. The ordinary intellect, though, has a kind of, for a sidestep, I said I was going to mention, it has a kind of unnoted knowledge of what I was going to say. And by unnoted, again, I want to point out, I don't mean, and all of you should know on your own by now, because there's no good way to describe this, it's beyond the range of words. It doesn't mean that man has an unconscious knowledge of this. They do not, but there's information that is, let us just say, mythically speaking, that there is information of coming from a 6D world, a 6D reality, and aspects of it are here, and we're dealing with 3 and 4D. And so when I say that there are things that, of course, I always want to put in quotation marks, and you should too, to say that there are things that men know and they don't know they know. That's how it used to be put, and it's still, that leads ordinary, secondary, sophisticated, up-to-date people to think, oh, you mean unconsciously. And that's the best shot they've been able to give it. But it's not unconsciously, because that implies that the knowledge could be here and that there is something flawed in you individually or in some group collectively so that you just can't bring it to the surface. No, that's not it. It's not going to come to the surface because you already know at the ordinary level as much as you can know, but just picture that you're getting 4-dimensional knowledge of something that is actually 6-dimensional. Just take that as a decent picture. And that's what I mean when I say that man, in an unregistered way, in an unnoted way, that man knows without knowing. Because it doesn't mean subconsciously, it doesn't mean unconsciously, and it doesn't mean that something's wrong and that this knowledge should be here. The knowledge shouldn't be here. The knowledge can't be here. You're dealing with a 4D mind, 4D intelligence at your own neural building site, and anything more than that is just outside your range. The human ear can hear from 50 to 20,000 or 15,000. Anything beyond that, we can say, well, we can prove it exists, but you can't hear it. So what the hell does it matter? It's not that, well, wait a minute, now that I know that there are actually sound waves that we can prove here by some extrinsic, some non-human means, some technological means, we can prove that there are sound waves vibrating per second at 35,000. That doesn't mean that they're vibrating at an unconscious level, such as if you went through analysis, or that you could become clean or clear, Dianetics, or go through some, whatever it is, some metaphysical something, and my brain is cleared up, and suddenly I can hear 35,000 megahertz per second. Woo! No. See, that's what I mean. So just assume, which you should be able to picture, whatever the hell it would be, like you don't know what 35,000 cycles per second would sound like. You'll never know in this life. In the same way, assume that ordinary intelligence will never know what a 6-dimensional piece of information, 6-dimensional energy would be. But what it gets, oftentimes, is reflected in what life is having men say, and they don't even notice it, is what I was going to get to. That the very thing I'm talking about, the language of man, in a way that perhaps you'll see, looks to be confusing. And men try to explain by coming up with the word metaphor, is that men's words themselves, at times when they're talking about life being thing specific, gives a hint of what I'm talking about without them recognizing it. Such as, here's a good old one. I think it even came from religious source, so we'll get that, but now it's just part of ordinary wisdom. That good old proverb, truism, that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Well, that's obviously incorrect. Who wins races? The swift. Who wins every battle in the three-dimensional world? Whoever's the strongest. That's it. And yet, you notice I stopped there for a second after I said it. Saw some of you over there in the amen corner kind of nodding your head like, yes, yes, you know, how true, how spiritually deep. It's obviously incorrect. But that has been floating around in the Western world in some version or another for at least 3,000 years. And people still say it. And it can be said today, and people will go, my, my. Why? Well, of course, right quick, the first thing is that a fairly sophisticated person, be they religious or not, could say, well, that's metaphorical. They could say that. And then I could say, to what end? Why say something that is obviously just anybody walking around? Find somebody that doesn't even know what the word metaphor means. A roofer, an attorney, a dentist. And say, what in the hell does this mean that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong? Now, I don't sound like something a drunk would say, because it's not true. But yet you have those that appear to be in charge of the ordinary world's highest levels, at the ordinary level, of intellect and insight. They keep remembering it. They write it down. They have it tattooed on their forearms if intellectuals had forearms. Had tattoos. At least I didn't say biceps. Why, to what purpose are such obviously incorrect ideas, that is, forms of energy clothed in words, continued to be passed along? As I said, somebody could say metaphorical. Then somebody else could say, that was perhaps operating as part of life's critics, could say, well, that's for weak people and slow people, and they're probably religious, whoever says that and keeps repeating it, because they're probably the ones that won't dream, well, all right, in this life, in this carnal, sinful, evil life, perhaps sometimes the swift do win races, but they cheat. They had more money than I did. They had a better start in life. Perhaps sometimes the battles are won by the strong, but they got strong by nefarious means. After I die, being a good blank, Catholic, Jew, whatever, then we'll see. All right, some critic could make that notation, but I could point this out again. I could say, well, still to what end? Why torture people? The people that are losing races. Why say, well, maybe it could be different later after you die. Now, at the ordinary level, at first you might say, well, that's not torturing people, that's to give them hope. Look at it another way. Does that actually give hope? They're losing the race already, and now you're going to say it could be otherwise. That you believe in another life, so you believe in some great gods or forces, and you're saying that right now, they're sitting there letting you lose the race. Just because these other people are faster, they can afford, air running shoes. Nikes, and you're having to run around here in these damn, $5 Kmarts. No wonder they win the race. I ask you again, to what end? It's considered proverbial. No, I shouldn't say proverbial. It's considered actual metaphorical wisdom. That the race is not to the swift. The battle, not to the strong. It's an out-and-out lie. It's three-dimensionally inoperative. And people say it over and over and nod. What's going on? Now, you remember where I started this. I was going to suggest to you that at that unnoticed level, is reflected in man's speech, and they don't know they know it, and it's not unconscious, but it's reflected by that speech, if you can see it, is that speech itself, that is, that form of overt, active intellect, is taking unnoted note of. How about that? Taking unnoted note of the fact that salient, obvious, or at least accepted conclusions are not actually real cessations of the process. Do you understand by saying, by repeating, by the intellect agreeing with, the race is not to the swift nor the battle to the strong? That is cutting off the process of whatever the race means. Take it really metaphorical now. Take it symbolic. Or taking the battle. Because all you're talking about is you're talking about life. The intellect knows that just because somebody apparently won the race right now, that somebody won today, that somebody else is heavier and their end of the seesaw went down and I'm up. I'm left holding the bag again. I'm the one having to dance backwards and be dipped. The intellect knows that ain't the end of it. It doesn't know it knows it, but speech gives it away by coming up with such obvious, incorrect statements as, the race is not to the swift. You can look around and it's always the swift that win, if it's only up and up. But the intellect, being a process itself, and without knowing it, knows that race don't mean squat. I'm trying to get crude to make you see. It knows that, all right, the race, they fired the gun, the race took off, got to the end, they announced the winner. Those that didn't win, they tear up their tickets, they're mad. The intellect knows, even though they say, all right, the race was won by horse so-and-so, by man so-and-so, by religion so-and-so, by nation so-and-so, by political philosophy so-and-so, the intellect knows, no, it ain't. But it is not wired up to deal with that. And so it's got to deal with things. It can't deal with a race that never stops. It has to deal with a winner and a loser. How could anybody, why would anybody, how could they stand it that if you went out to see a race, that was your hobby, or what if I said this is the greatest symbolic undertaking you could do is to go see a race, and you went to see a race and it started. We'll have to say it started to even get this started. So let's say it started, and you stand there and it never ends. Don't make me have this. It just never ends. You're standing there and you're interested for whatever reason. You're naturally interested, or I insist, this is the most important thing you could ever see. And you stand there, and we got what, 20, 30, 40 years. The race never ends. And periodically, perhaps I walk by or pop in and say, how's it going? You know, how long would it be before you're ready to strangle me or yourself? Like, what's the object of this? Because remember, the ordinary intellect, in your process, the object is always a thing. That the object of thinking has got to be knowledge. But not a race that goes on forever. Not thinking that goes on forever. There's got to be some point to this. Where's the end of the race? When does it stop? When does it become a thing? That is, a finished race. When is there a winner? So I can see whether I won, whether I was on the right side, if I can see there's losers. The speech, and I just picked out one. Religions are full of them, philosophies, proverbs, truisms, maxims, epithets. They're everywhere. The ones, and they sound oftentimes to be so enigmatic, so paradoxical. I mean, if they're going to be analyzed, such as a race is not to the swift. When whoever first said that, whoever turned around and said, aren't you the one, are you the guy writing Leviticus or Deuteronomy? Here, take this down. I like this one. And he gives them that one. The guy writing should have went, are you nuts? How in the hell did you find marijuana here? And it's 500 BC. Where'd you get that stuff? What do you mean the race is not for the swift? Where you been going to races? Throughout the religions, all the things, and of course then they get into at the very systematic, organized, institutional level, that's when they get into such things as faith. That's when they get into such things as man's mind will never understand these questions. And nobody ever asks, well, if that be true, why is it arranged to where man can ask the question? Why is it arranged to where man can ask the questions and then even be as smart as you say you are to go, well, we can sure ask those questions, but we can't ever answer them. Well, how'd you even get that smart? Because none of this is logical, none of this is sequential, and you're not going to prove it to you or anybody on the basis of trying to catch people. trying to trip them up and play Socrates at a real three-dimensional level. That's not it. But it is that I'm telling you that the intellect is operating within the confines of a greater reality. Speech is operating within the confines of a more complex universe. And it's always talking in a certain way. And every time it's talking in ways that strike just an ordinary person as being paradoxical, ironical, enigmatic. There's something else going on, such as the race is not to the swift. My. I've always believed. I always nodded when that happened, but now I realize that's insane. Why have I always thought that was true? Why have I always thought that was significant? That's why. And yet the intellect phrases and repeats such as that on the basis I'm trying to get you to see that based upon a more complex reality, that it is still letting out the information that this is not true, but it's not true on this basis. That processes do not stop just because the intellect stops there. The race is not over just because the intellect says, well, I guess I lost this time. It appears to be that your race lost. Your battle was lost or won. But your battle is not the battle. Your race is not the race. You're not even talking about the race, you're talking about your perception of the race going on. You're talking about your perception of the battle. And the only way you can perceive it is it has to be thing-oriented. It has to come to a thing conclusion. Let's hit or re-hit something we mentioned last time, kinds of operational definitions, operational distinctions between thinking a process and knowledge a thing. And of course, knowledge being the thing the ordinary intelligence says is the object of thinking. But just at the end, we mentioned several last time, I was going to, with thinking, what are we meaning by this as opposed to knowledge? Plain thinking, revolutionist thinking, new thinking, thinking with no object, thinking that does not even fall into the illusionary embrace of a conclusion, one that does not even have the hornies for a conclusion. It's that kind of thinking. But the distinctions that I was going to propose is you could look at knowledge as being, pick up where we hit some of it last time, you could look at knowledge as being equal to seriousness. And I don't know what else to say. All of you know, by any means, whether it be religious, scientific, knowledge is serious. Facts are serious. I mean, if you tell somebody a fact and they laugh, you got problems. And everybody knows that. They just don't go around thinking it. It just seems to be so obvious. But if you tell somebody something, a piece of your real knowledge, and they laugh, knowledge is serious. Well, no, it has to be, of course. It's serious whether it be in science, religion, or you just giving real important knowledge. Forget science and religion. Real important knowledge like, I'll tell you the kind of guy I am. And you give out some real knowledge about, well, I'm the kind of guy. When I hear people with the wrong opinion, even though it may cost me, I'm the kind of guy who'll speak up. I mean, that's just the kind of guy I am. And whoever you're talking to goes, that is not the way life works. Knowledge is serious. It has to be. Knowledge, also operational definition, synonyms. Knowledge is also comfort. It's equal to comfort. It is equal to complacency in one lifetime, even when it's in science. I picked religion, that example about that people believe that the object of being a Catholic or pursuing a religion is to actually become something, to become a Corvette. You understand? A Catholic. In the same way, science says, well, investigation, contemplation, intellectual games I'm trying to play, the pictures, the whole thought process in science is to reach some knowledge. It is a form of comfort. It is always a form of complacency, even though science might say, if some ordinary science was listening to this and responding, might say, well, no, science never rests. No, that's Neil Young. No, that's Russ. And I can say, science never rests. We're always trying to push the frontiers. Oh, yeah? You find a guy who just got the Nobel Prize. You find a guy that's just been published in the Theoretical Physics Review. And he just came up with his new theory that's getting some attention. And you say, well, hey, let's go a little past that. The man said, hey, yo, dude, give me a break. It took me all my life to get published in a prestigious journal. Instead of the Peckerhead Gazette. And you ask, do you want to push the frontiers? Don't you want to know more? Well, maybe so, but, ease up. Ease up. I just got here. That's one lifetime. Knowledge at that level is comfort. For you to think, well, I do have knowledge. If you were, as they say in psychology, I guess more inwardly personal directed, which I don't know where they ever got that idea. But especially if other people say, ooh, your knowledge, ooh, it is admirable. Decorous. Your knowledge impresses us. That is comfort. A man, rightly so, can say, well, it's about time. I've been slaving here, in the bowels of MIT. And finally, after all my theories that didn't fly and that everybody laughed at, finally I got one. Now, you people are not laughing. This call from the Nobel Committee, this wasn't one of you guys that, down the hall that joking. You didn't make that call. I'm actually up for the prize. I actually won the prize. It's now serious. And you understand, it is a form of comfort. And it is a form of complacency. It's what knowledge is. And it's supposed to be. This is not an attack, because once you know something, if I say, wait a minute, knowledge is nothing more. It's just equal to, operationally speaking, it's equal to complacency. And I made complacency sound like a sneer. A guy would go, what the hell's the point of having knowledge? It is to make you complacent. I wouldn't have used those words. But to have knowledge of something, to finally find out without any doubt that 2 and 2 is 4, yeah, I'm complacent about it. Because I'm glad to know. I'm glad to know something solid. You could also look at knowledge as being operationally synonymous with maladaptiveness. Don't anybody see if there's such a word. There's maladaptive, I'm fairly sure. So maladaptiveness. But again, if you got into science, or you just ordinary by using science as an extreme example, they could say, well, no, wait a minute, science is fluid. Science is flexible. Science does adapt. I know. Life does. Life today is not the same that life was in the 1930s. Yeah, but science does adapt. One lifetime, the lifetime of the nervous system in one man, knowledge is maladaptive. If you don't believe it, ask somebody, a mathematician, let us say, to go back into science. There's a new theory that says 2 and 2 is 5. Are you going to get anything resembling even the potential to adapt for a man to say, well, I have several degrees, yes, I know who you are. In mathematics, yes, I was aware that I saw it on the door. And I've got to tell you, yes, are you considering what I just told you? Not really. Well, would you ponder it? Because a friend of mine said that 2 and 2 is not 4. No. And of course, at the city level, he has very good reason. He can say, well, it's insane. It's a known fact. That's the basis right there, that kind of thing. We can use that, shall I say, metaphorically, right at the heart of the knowledge of mathematics, that 2 and 2 is 4. That mathematics has to be the answer to any mathematical problem. It's got to be that answer and nothing else. Or else it's not stable. It's not a fact. So no, I can't. You wouldn't even try to adapt your thinking to consider the possibility that 2 and 2 might not be 4. There's no need to. So you're maladaptive, eh? Get out of here, kid. I ain't got time for this crap. Knowledge is maladaptive. It has to be, or it's not knowledge. As opposed to all of this, And also, I'll note one more time, some of you seem to like it, you could also see that starting from the first one I presented of knowledge being equal to seriousness, to carry on symbolic logic, if not verbal logic, also see that seriousness is quite synonymous with death. Or if that seems too strong, seriousness is very equitable to severe fatigue. How about that? At the other end of this, the other side, I was going to compare thinking. You could look at, now we're talking about real, some kind of non-objective thinking. That is, thinking an ongoing process as being joyful, being equitable with merriment, lack of sorrow, self-pity. You could also see thinking as being equal to variety, vitality. You could see thinking as being equal to innovation, flexibility, as opposed to maladaptiveness. Because if you're comparing this in the way that I'm trying to hint of thinking being absolutely open-ended, not involved with seeking anyway a conclusion, then you have got to see you have got a living example of innovation, of flexibility. You could see thinking as being equal to, could we end up being musical, to blue skies, clean breath, and dark red blood. All right, one last one. How about to go back to our myths? How about the moral of all these tales would be, why would anything other than a dull knight, K, settle for actually finding the Holy Grail, when he could, on the contrary, continue to look for it forever?